Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video and myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof for the 10th of June 2025. We have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find those caveats linked in the description below. Interesting figure on here that you can see 2 aircraft added to the list. I think that's significant and probably refers to the 2 aircraft that were hit yesterday, thought to have been hit at an airbase. I was just digging in to remind you here of that claim yesterday. Ukraine said it hit yesterday. A Russian MiG-31 and a Su-34 30 or 34 fighter jets in an attack on an airfield at Savaslayka in Nizhny Novgorod. Now, I presume that's what these numbers refer to. They could be additions to the Operation Spiderweb. They could be, some other claim. But joining the dots, I think it's going to refer to the claim from yesterday. 960 personnel lost is below the 1,000 mark again for a second day in a row. 4 tanks and 9 troop-carrying airfields, both below the daily average. 48 artillery systems is about 4 times the daily average. Just over twice the daily average. Sorry, maths difficult. Just over twice the daily average. So a good day there for artillery losses. MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, one of those lost. 107 vehicles and fuel tanks and 1 piece of special equipment. So not the highest numbers in any of these categories, but really good to see 2 aircraft on the list. I presume that means that there is visual evidence to confirm those aircraft losses in Nizhny Novgorod, although I don't know, but it could well be the satellite imagery to confirm that. Now, we're talking about personnel. Yesterday, there was an exchange of war prisoners. I think there's going to be another set of these being released or swapped. Today's swap or yesterday's swap saw military under the age of 25 set free. So this is one of the aspects of this next prisoner exchange was going to be there would be younger soldiers being exchanged. So military under the age of 25, an equal number from both sides. Haven't seen the exact figures stipulated, says Tim White. Most of these guys have been incarcerated since 2022. So many joyous scenes as Ukraine welcomed home their youngest POWs. They are from the SBU, Ukrainian People's Army, Marine Corps, and other armed services, including some survivors of Mariupol as well. So really good to see these young men be returned to Ukraine, to their families. I presume that the same can be said for the Russians from a Russian point of view. Russia too showed videos of their captured soldiers being released at the Istanbul peace talks. The only thing agreed was an all of young POWs and seriously ill or injured. No news on when the next batch will be, nor when bodies will be exchanged either. So there you have the Russians there being exchanged as well. Much more somber when it comes to the Russians, I have to say. There's always so many flags and happy faces and whatnot when you look at the Ukrainians. We never really see the Russians back with their families and whatnot. I don't know if that's because the socials don't show those or not the socials we look at. Is there a selection bias, or is it just that it's just not like that on the Russian side of things? Right. Yesterday it was reported, actually this is 2 days ago now, it was reported that Ukraine struck an Iskander launcher site. So if you remember that, killed 5 and injured 8 of Russia's military. One of Ukraine's most experienced and connected journalists, Andriy Sapelenko, now says 14 servicemen were eliminated and names them all. So that's interesting. That you have some quite high-ranking people there as well, and a commander of the Iskander division was supposed to be in that list as well. So really useful strike that was. And I showed you yesterday, if you remember, it was kind of like a recreation center out in Rilsk that obviously isn't being used as a recreation center. That was hit by 4 HIMARS missiles. Well, today you have this claim from a Russian source saying, we cannot recall a case where the official mouthpiece of the Northern Guard admitted that the crests, that's Ukrainians with their HIMARS, did not hit the sky or a residential building with a kindergarten, but actually hit a military facility. How many of our officers died after such attacks from the 810th Brigade and a 22nd MPS, at the same long-suffering 155th? We could make active links to our messages, but there would be too many of them. Right, so up in this area, in the Kursk area, where the Russians were repelling the Ukrainians when they first attacked into Kursk, you had a bunch of different units that were moved to there. Two of them were the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade and the 155th as well. Both of these in the end, had a right bloody nose from their activities in Kursk. The 810th had already been absolutely hammered in the Krinky area by Kherson on the Dnipro River. 155th had a hammering, I think, in Vuhledar way back when they were just getting repeatedly mauled there. I think the 155th have been reconstituted a number of times, so they're not really the crack brigade that they used to be. But anyway, it's 155th and the 810th, but the 155th a number of times recently that have been targeted in these strikes, these HIMARS strikes on places like Rilsk, Lugov, and other targets around that Kursk area. And again, this is what we hear. It's 155th taking a beating. This time, the arrival could not be ignored, says this Russian. Too many officers with high epaulets were in one place, and it would be too difficult to hide their deaths, although they would have wanted to, I presume, remain hidden. The Cultural and Leisure Centre was not the first time the meetings were held, so this is hitting a meeting there of, it appears, high-ranking officials, always with an above-average level of organisation. The commanders came to them with pleasure. Was it a secret for anyone? The number of cool cars near the community centre indicated that it was not a congress of collective farmers from the Rilsk region. The observance of basic camouflage rules was given a big nod, the kind that only big shoulder straps can afford. It is possible that someone leaked the location of the meeting. The issue of ratting in the GV North is not closed, but in any case, this is a great tragedy. Sincere condolences to the relatives of the deceased 155th Marine Brigade. So another crack, well, 155th again, but another time that there's been a really significant strike in this general area, and could well have been a host of high-ranking officials there hit in that strike if this Russian claim is to be believed. Right, another personnel... well, it's a whole thread here, and in fact, I think it's a 43 post thread. We're not going to go through it all. Just to go through the first few, give you a sense of what this is. This is another really significant Chryso Wiki thread. A Russian military doctor has spoken frankly in an interview about the atrocious state of Russian military medicine and the lack of medical training given to soldiers. Most of the wounded die, he says. The doctors themselves are treated as slaves by the Russian military. So we've long talked about this idea that the Ukrainians have a better, golden hour, platinum 5 minutes. The idea that you need to staunch that blood within 5 minutes, or this person's going to be dead, and you need to medevac them to a kind of staging point to give them proper treatment within an hour. If not, those wounded in action become killed in action. And then we've been looking at the ratio of wounded to killed, or killed to wounded, in terms of the loss statistics over time. And there's been this prevailing idea that, and I think it's somewhat evidence, that the Ukrainians have a much better success rate in keeping wounded as wounded and not converting them into dead. Whereas the Russians, and partly there's going to be a logistical challenge for the Russians, they're in a foreign country essentially, where they don't control all the logistics as well, or as the front line has moved further and further forward, they've just destroyed hospitals and logistics and whatnot, that it becomes actually fairly practically difficult for the Russians to evacuate their wounded. First of all, get them off the front lines when it's so dangerous. And the drone control of the Ukrainians appears to be at least a little bit better than the drone control of the Russians, although that is variable. And the Ukrainians will be suffering from this too, but it just seems that they have got slightly better infrastructure for removing wounded from the field of war and then sorting them out. Whereas the Russians, they are allowing them to convert to dead far too easily. And so when you look at the loss stats, that if say you have 100,000 casualties on each side, out the 100,000 casualties, for the Russians, there'll be far more that are dead. And this is another data point to add into the evidence to support that conclusion. So most of the wounded die, he says. The doctors themselves are treated as slaves by the Russian military. The Russian Telegram channel Transform has published a lengthy interview with the experiences of Dr. Alexander Moiseyevich, that's a pseudonym. He volunteered for the army at the age of 62 in October 2022 and resigned in June 2024 when he reached the mandatory retirement age of 65. Alexander first worked as a military doctor in the 1970s. During the Soviet era, he said things were very different then. The Soviet-style military system effectively persisted in Russia until the reforms of the then defense minister, Anatoly Serdyukov, were enacted. Those changes were enacted in 2008. Serdyukov's reforms were intended to professionalize the army and reduce it in size. While some of these objectives were achieved, Alexander says, quote, the medical component of the armed forces were recognized as excessive and was cut, decimating the military medical service. Under Serdyukov, hospitals were liquidated en masse. A system of sanatorium and resort treatment was almost completely destroyed, and the system of personnel training was cut. This turned out to have very negative consequences in the current war. As Alexander notes, military medicine is something that can be quickly destroyed, and it takes 10 to 15 years to restore. The problem is aggravated by the fact that civilian medicine has also been optimized to the point of incapacity, which the pandemic has demonstrated to us in all its glory. Alexander says that civilian doctors are unfamiliar with the type of injuries received in warfare and are at a loss when presented with a complex case that needs to be rapidly triaged, such as prioritizing which pieces of shrapnel to pull out of a wounded soldier's body first. Evacuation on the Ukrainian battlefield is usually difficult and often impossible due to the constant threat of drone attacks. And ChrisOWiki has an entire thread on that just below here, so you can check that out. Alexander highlights the importance of self-care for soldiers. Quote, each soldier must be able to provide first aid to himself and his comrade, and in a comprehensive manner. It is necessary not only to apply a tourniquet, pack the wound, but also to relieve pain, properly fix the limb, and disinfect. What difference does it make whether a soldier dies from blood loss or from an infection? But most are sure that it is enough to stop the bleeding and then let the doctors figure it out. The level of sanitary training in the troops is extremely low, and this is the main reason for wounded mortality. Of course, the thing is that now any training of soldiers, including the one based on providing medical care to themselves on the battlefield, is pure profanation. They will show you how to tie a tourniquet, but that's all the training you get. At the same time, it's impossible to use what is issued to soldiers as a standard. So this is a perennial problem, right? This is a problem for the Ukrainians. There was a lot of talk, and there still is a lot of talk, about not enough quality tourniquets, and the training for them is lacking. But it's particularly a problem for the Russians here, and so many wounded are getting converted into being killed in action. But I'll leave that thread there. You get the idea. Here we have yet another bit of video footage of the Ukrainians using their guided glide bombs, and this time again in Tetkino. We've seen that Tetkino has been getting a little bit of a hammering over the recent weeks. Okay, soldiers of the 5th Assault Brigade here shot down a new VTU AI, and I pulled this out because I only talked about this drone yesterday in my military aid video, so go and check that out. This is an AI capable attack drone, kamikaze drone. Drone is dangerous due to its ability to autonomously select targets and is resistant to electronic warfare. So here we have this VTU drone getting taken down by an interceptor. And yeah, that is a capable Russian drone. I said we might see more of these, and then the next day we see a video of one getting taken out there. So good to see. Right, okay, Belgorod region, we have a fuel tanker on fire. Looks pretty significant there. Don't know if this is a strike from a drone, careless smoker, but there you go, Belgorod just over the border. More fire for the Russians to contend with. Now, we hear that Ukraine's new ballistic missile may have already been used. And again, I talked about this at much more depth. Talked about the development of the FRIM-2 ballistic missile for the Ukrainians. And there were claims that they'd done tests on it back in August and it was looking good. And Zelensky talked about it then. And of course, we're now in June the next year. And now he's announced that, or it's been announced that tests have been successful for 300 kilometers for a new ballistic missile. But actually, that could suggest they've been using it or testing it on the front line or in the war already. No point sort of testing these things, I guess, back on an empty field. You want to test them on the Russians themselves. So in May 2025, said to Euromaidan Press, the Ukrainian armed forces sharply increased the number of destroyed Russian command posts, indicating new strike capabilities. So they've got a whole article on that. I'm just going to go to this reference to Valery Ryabik, the development director at Defense Express, as talked about by Visioner here. Big news. So he stated that the situation on the battlefield is entering a very interesting phase. According to him, Ukraine's defense forces have significantly enhanced their capabilities to defeat Russian occupying forces. He noted that, particularly at the beginning of May, the number of destroyed Russian command posts, indicating Ukraine's growing technological capacity. One notable example was a successful operation that destroyed 3 units of the Iskander missile complex division. So we saw that the other day. In fact, we've just been talking about who died in that incident here. So that's the incident where 3 Iskander launchers were destroyed in the Bryansk Oblast. So that's what's mentioned here. Ryabik emphasized that Ukraine has acquired all the necessary components to carry out such strikes and has integrated them using the link system implemented on the F-16 fighter jets. He added that Ukraine's armed forces have likely been using ballistic missiles against enemy targets for about a year. Many experts and analysts have been unable to identify the means used in certain strikes that hit enemy targets, suggesting that Ukraine may have been secretly testing its own ballistic weapons. According to Ryabik, there are strong indications that Ukraine has already begun testing its domestic ballistic missile system under real combat conditions and may be entering serial production. He also recalled that President Zelensky had repeatedly hinted at this development. Various signs pointed to it, particularly the fact that over the past year, military analysts were often unable to determine what exactly had struck targets deep inside enemy territory, which strongly suggests that these were live combat tests of a Ukrainian ballistic system. Okay, so good news. We'll have to keep our eyes open to see whether Ukraine are able to take out certain targets, probably to between the 300 to 500 kilometer range, certainly the 300 kilometer range, with half decent unit. I mean, these are supposedly got 500 kilogram. I saw mentioned yesterday 400, so I mentioned 500. Let's assume 500 kilograms, which is just a little bit more than the Iskander M, which has 480 kilogram warhead. So these are pretty decent bits of kit if we're talking about the FRIM-2s. Their circle error probable isn't as good as, say, the ATACMS, which I think has a 10-meter circle error probable. 50% of the time it's going to hit within 10 meters. Or at least that's how you gauge it. It could be that they hit much more often in that to that accuracy, whereas the FRIM-2 has a 50-meter, not a 10-meter, but a 50-meter circle error probable. So not quite as accurate, but still not too shabby. Okay, right, we're going to move on to an Intel Schizo reached out actually to talk again about Spiderweb 2.0, this idea that there was a train with a load of equipment that was blown up by potentially drones flying out of grain hoppers, but there appears to be no evidence, no visual evidence to support that. But Intel Schizo, who was one of the people that came up with one of the initial posts detailing it, has said, look, I'm going to start off very clearly and plainly that more verification and higher resolution imagery is needed. This is a very early potential geolocation of the claimed attack on a Russian military train on June the 6th. So the overview of the claim is that 1 locomotive, 13 tanks, 100 armoured vehicles, 10 tank cars were destroyed. In order to transport this equipment, you would need a train with the following equipment: 1 to 2 locomotives, 63 flat cars, 10 tank cars. The total length of this train would be about 1,356 meters. So that's a train that's over a kilometer long. This fire damages along the rail line is approximately 1.35 kilometers or 1,360 meters. So it's right on the money. So he's basically geolocated train line track damage that suggests an area of track that big has been damaged. With this, the fire damage along the rail line matches the approximate length of the train that Ukraine claims to have attacked. Again, this is pretty early, and I would love to see higher resolution imagery. The cleanup for this likely would have been fairly quick. Put the fire out, bring some reserve locomotives to attach the rear of the train, and go back to Crimea. As Rob Lee has noted, along with other people who have paid attention to Russian rail in this sector, Russian trains predominantly have only been fuel trains, and we've not seen much equipment movement along this line since the first year of the war. So he's suggesting that there is a place near Chernihivka where the rail damage is extensive, and it looks to be this area there, where you've got, clean railway line going up here, and it all goes a bit funky for what he claims is about 1.4 kilometers. If we just have a look at the imagery here, I'm pretty sure this is where we're talking about, just up there. So that's what Intel Schizo says, but actually also goes on to mention, sorry, I've gone on to the wrong one there. Also goes on to, or he doesn't mention, but someone else in the thread below mentions another geolocation somewhere else. This is the last post I saw about the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine reported a destruction of a railway locomotive. Everyone was surprised by this because there was no OK footage, and none has appeared yet except for satellite images of the railway track near Verkhny Tokmak in Zaporizhia region. Poor quality images and SAR images show that there are indeed traces of damage to the track, but nothing more. So we're waiting better quality images to confirm. And that's in another spot. So that was Dnipro OSINT, that which is also indicated by someone else. So Gick, who is part of the Andrew Perpetua team, also identified an area that's specific to the 6th of June. You should definitely give him a follow, because this is like finding a needle in a haystack. This specific area is way smaller than what was alleged to be attacked, but is more consistent with the typical fuel train that goes through that area on a regular basis. Okay, so the first geolocation, according to, and by the way, this one that's talked about by Dnipro OSINT and Gick is an area there. So essentially, it looks like there are two bits of track that have definitely been hit, blown up, had something blow up on it, but you can't tell anything more from that. It's just satellite images to show damaged track. One of which is a considerable length. The other is not as long. These geolocations, the first one is around Chonhar. Now we know that there was a backup to Chonhar recently, where there were trucks that were backed up going into Chonhar. I don't know if that has anything to do with this, because you have the railway bridge there, if I remember it correctly, and the truck or the car bridge there, the road bridge there. They've been struck before, and here you have the railway right next to the road. So I don't know if destruction to the train track there could also have affected the road. But again, why would you not have any video evidence? You've got trucks driving past there. These drivers are going to have mobile phones. So, lots of questions about this anyway. But there is a considerable length of damaged track near Chonhar, and that is of logistical importance. And that goes into Crimea. And then the second geolocation is much deeper into Zaporizhia on the way to Donetsk here. And that's the shorter bit of line that has been geolocated with damage on it just there. So anyway, does it prove that Spiderweb 2.0 took place? No, not at all. But it's another piece of the jigsaw that could suggest it happened, or the very least, there are two bits of railway that have been severely damaged by the looks of it. But these are low resolution satellite images. You need something much better to go over and look at these. And of course, what most people with satellite images do well, if you're going to order high resolution satellite images, you're like Andrew Perpetua does. You're going to be looking at satellite images right along the contact line. There's no point looking at buying, $500 worth of satellite images to look at random bits of Ukraine unless you've got really good reason to do so. And so essentially, what you do is you rely on cheap or free low resolution satellite images, but then you're hardly able to see stuff. But occasionally you might come across things that could be of interest, and then you have to pay lots of money to get high resolution imagery. And so most of the evidence we're going to see of anything happening is going to be along this contact line. So that's also why you might not be seeing much evidence of something like a strike along a railway, especially when you don't know where that took place along and what railway it even was. But anyway, there you go. Just thought I'd throw that one in there as well. Right, we're going to distance munitions, distance strikes, and it was a hellish night for people, particularly in Kiev last night, with one of the biggest attacks on Kyiv, I think. Although we have far fewer drones sent in last night. I say far fewer, still a phenomenal amount of drones sent in last night, but just fewer than those two record days we've had previously, 479, 472. Those two were insanely big numbers. Last night was only 315. Right, 315 drones being sent in is an absolute disaster of an evening for a night for the Ukrainians, and they were having to work their socks off to try and intercept these. 276 out of the 315 were intercepted in one way or another. That leaves 24 and 15, which is 39 out of. So you're talking around just less than 10%. So the interception rate is okay. That's better than the 30 odd percent that we've seen for sure. Now, 2 KN-22 ballistic missiles were shot down, and 5 Iskander-K cruise missiles out of 5 were shot down. So all 7 missiles were intercepted. That's excellent news. There are lots of theories about what could be happening. I was talking about how interception rates probably go up when they start targeting bigger cities, and I think that's definitely the case. Like Kiev, if you're going to throw lots of drones against Kiev, Kiev is going to intercept most of those drones because that's where the best air defenses are. If you're going to throw 100 drones against Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, right near the contact line, you don't have time to shoot them down. They're going to hit their targets pretty much unhindered. So it depends where the Russians are attacking as to what the interception rate is. But also, some people have been mentioning that possibly these 2 Saab 340, the ASC 890 planes, the GlobalEye AWACS planes, might also be helping. So the interception rates going up could mean that they've got interceptors for missile systems such as IRIS-T. We talked about them recently. I did a big section on the IRIS-T yesterday in yesterday's military aid video. And how they took out 8 cruise missiles with 8 shots in 30 seconds. The full load of their missiles on a single launcher, all loaded up, 30 seconds, took 8 cruise missiles down. That's incredible. So, they could have more surface-to-air missile systems. Patriot coming online from Israel, possibly a couple of those, PAC-2 Patriots. But also those Saab planes being able to locate a lot of targets over quite a range. Some of the larger sort of cruise missile targets, I think, up to, 300, 400, 500 kilometers. Someone was saying that the smaller drones, 100 kilometers, they'll get a good target acquisition on those. But you're flying constantly around with those 2 Saabs, you are going to find a lot more targets. And it could be that they have made an impact as they've been, I think, enabled to be used since the end of May. Now, Jimmy Rushton says, I've lived in Kiev for 3 years, and this is probably the biggest Russian drone attack the city has experienced in my time here. Shahed drones were exploding everywhere. Searchlights, gunfire, the scream of the drone's engines before it impacts, then a shattering explosion over and over. So, although there were fewer drones sent into Ukraine compared to the record-breaking nights, still a lot of drones sent into Ukraine, and mainly at Kiev. And Kiev, it was a hellish night. It was a hellish night in Kiev. So last night, Kiev and Odesa was the other one, came under massive Russian missile and drone attack. In Kiev, debris damaged homes, vehicles, business centres and infrastructure. About at least 4 people were injured. In Odesa, a maternity ward burned, an ambulance station was destroyed, and homes were hit. 2 were killed, 6 were injured. So lots of images coming out of Kiev. There was thick black smoke over Kiev as dawn broke. And yeah, I don't know what was hit, if anything, military, but there's certainly a lot of effect on the civilian infrastructure in Kiev and commercial infrastructure. Clouds of smoke rise above Kiev after Russia's night drone and missile attack, says Euromaidan Press, one of the largest ever on Ukraine's capital. So it looks like it was mainly targeting the capital. 7 city districts got suffered damage. Former UK visa centre got scorched too. Some more images here. Smoke over Kyiv this morning and damaged buildings. That looks like a relatively new commercial enterprise in flames there. So all of this cumulatively costs Ukraine over time huge amounts. And then here we have sort of, again, destruction being documented in Kyiv. St. Javelin, this is an incredible video, absolutely incredible. You've got in a Ukrainian apartment block, they're recording what's going on outside. And then you have, I'm going to turn the sound off because I get in trouble, but you've got just an absolutely huge explosion taking place relatively near to this apartment block. And they are just, I mean, just the sights people are seeing that really you'd rather they weren't seeing. Just incredible destruction taking place. We've got another one of a one-way attack drone hitting a high-rise residential building in Kiev. As Richard Woodruff, who I'm hoping to interview, he's out in Ukraine. Great effing job, Russia. Bet you're proud of all your military might just because you aren't intelligent enough to hit airfields. Doesn't mean you need to be thick as poo and hit kids. So, you know, you've got a residential building with, could be like, I don't know, play parks or car parking or whatever outside, and just, you know, that is happening night after night. Tim White, as ever, has documented so much of what happened last night throughout the night. He stays up very late, documenting initially what was taking place in Odesa. There seemed to be destruction happening in Odesa before it happened in Kiev. With regard to Russia, and we'll come on to that, not too much detail coming out about Russia, but the airports were closed. Yeah, Odessa, lots of video evidence of fires and destruction there. At least one victim so far, woman with shrapnel wounds in the leg, he was saying 11 hours ago. So this is a long time back. Residential buildings near the hospital also badly damaged and some burn there. 2 explosions in Kyiv. Both collapses occurred in Borispil. But then it all just started coming in thick and fast for Kyiv. Problems with a number of different districts. You can see the images coming through. So we've got residential buildings damaged in one district, fire in an office building, damage to a non-residential building, car set on fire by falling drones, damage to 2 residential buildings, a fire in one of them, non-residential premises hit, at least one person killed in Odessa then eventually. 59-year-old man lost his life, and then another medical center and emergency hospital has also been damaged in Odessa, because, you know, nothing says liberation more than damaging medical infrastructure. Absolutely ridiculous. So on and so forth, and this went on throughout the night with, you know, typical images of the destruction to civilian infrastructure, but you don't know what military or very important industrial infrastructure might well have been hit. You got huge fires here in the Obolon. Not for the first time. Obolon seems to get targeted quite a bit in Kiev. A pharmacy in the district is on fire in a residential area, so obviously a very important military target there to hit that pharmacy. And yeah, more of the damage visible in Kiev about 4:30 in the morning, and it's still ongoing. As he says here, right now there's a thick pool of noxious black smoke over Kiev. Drones around Kiev still ongoing as the morning was sort of coming on. Dawn has broken over Ukraine on difficult nights. particularly for the cities of Odesa and Kiev. Thick black smoke can be seen and often smelt across the capital. Now, as far as Russia's concerned, drone was there was drone activity in Kursk, but I don't have too much other information. But to close airports in Voronezh, Samara, Saratov, Kazan, and Nizhnekamsk in the morning. All four of Moscow's airports were closed in the evening and night. So yeah, there's certainly activity, but we know very little about it. It's mainly about what was going on in Ukraine. So there you go. That was from yesterday, and of course you can go and check out Tim's threads to get much more of an idea of what was going on there. Now, interesting or good to see actually Ka-32 helicopter that's been provided by Portugal, helping in dousing fires in the Kyiv area. Here, the helicopter draws water from the Dnipro River to fight a fire in Kyiv. In 2007, Portugal purchased 6 of these helicopters from Russia, and then in October 2022, they announced that they were transferring all of the helicopters to Ukraine, as was Ukraine agreed to accept the helicopters in their current condition without repairs, and it appears they are being put to good use here, well, at least some of them. So this is a helicopter drawing from the reservoir, and then, or from the river, and then going and dropping that on fires taking place in Kiev. Now, just to move on to yesterday morning, I noted that 4 Kinzhal missiles out of 4 were shot down, and that really can only happen as a result of activity from Patriot PAC-3 surface-to-air missile systems, but also maybe the SAMP-T as well, the Franco-Italian air defense system. We know the new SAMP-T NG is going to be out imminently, I think 2025 I think it was touted for, so Ukraine might end up getting some of those, and they will have, I presume, probably the best capabilities in the world for taking down ballistic missiles until the Patriot system might get upgraded. You know, it'll be sort of an arms race there in terms of who has the better capabilities for taking out ballistic missiles. But in the meantime, for Ukraine, you know, without the ability to, or without the Israeli, because I think the Israelis have got their own Arrow systems as well. Arrow 2, is it? That'd be nice if the Ukrainians could get hold of that. But yeah, so they're really only relying on the Patriot PAC-3 and the SAMP-Ts, and 4 out of 4 Kinzhal missiles were taken out yesterday. That is really impressive. Hypersonic ballistic missiles being taken out successfully. Yuri Ihnat confirmed that the Patriot missile system operated at 100% effectiveness today, intercepting all 4 out of the 4 Kinzhal missiles that were targeting the Rivne region, so the Dubno air base there, which is interesting because that means that they have a Patriot system operational all that way west and not at Starokonstantiniv, which is the Khmelnytsky air base. So Dubno, I think, is a developing air base. So I wonder whether that, and the Russians know that now, that it's maybe an F-16 base, and that the Russians targeted it with 4 hypersonic missiles shows it's an incredibly important target, military target. And that you had a Patriot air defense system taking down those 4 Kinzhal missiles shows you that is a very important military target. There's no doubt that Dubno air base then, in my opinion, and I know nothing about it really, is an important military establishment for the Ukrainians, no doubt an F-16 airbase. Okay, mega massive attack on Russia and Crimea last night. So yet again, the Ukrainians flooding the Russian skies with drones, and we know very little about what took place. So interestingly, most of these appear to have gone into the Bryansk and Tula regions of, and Kaluga regions of Russia there, back over to the towards Belarus, really, that kind of region. Some going across into Voronezh and Belgorod, and a lot going into Crimea as well. Crimea and southern Kherson, Zaporizhia sort of regions. So A lot of activity from Ukrainian missiles and drones, but we do not have really any detail of what they achieved last night. It's a couple of things. Ukrainian kamikaze drones are attacking a Russian Shahid type drone manufacturing plant located in Republic of Tatarstan. So this is the Yelabuga plant, again, was targeted last night. But by the time these drones get there, it's daytime. It's 1,000 kilometers away. It takes an awful long time for them to get there. They're going to be flying at night so that they are protected from visual acquisition as targets, and shooting them down with your low tech means. That's an awful long way to fly over Russia. So nighttime is going to be much safer, but it takes so long that it becomes daytime by the time they actually get to, in this case, Tatarstan and Yelabuga. Now, what do we hear about this? There were multiple explosions. Drones attacked Yelabuga SEZ again this morning, says Max 25. The Synergy buildings 13.2 and 13.3, where engines and housings for Russian drones are assembled, were hit, according to Dnipro OSINT. We are waiting for satellite images or footage. Now, I honestly don't know why they aren't targeting this place every single night with like 50 drones every night. I think there were reports that maybe there were 5 explosions here or something. I don't know. I might be wrong that. Also, this footage is quite interesting because you've got a drone traveling very obviously in the daytime now, and some kind of explosion where they completely missed the drone. But I can't work. That is looks like it's a SAM system of sorts, but the missile explodes kind of just behind and above the drone, and is a completely unsuccessful attempt to take that drone out the sky. But I just thought that was interesting. But essentially, these drones appear to be flying unhindered, largely through masses of Russian airspace to get to Yelabuga. Now, actually, I say unhindered. I don't know how many were successfully taken down. Obviously, that one wasn't, but there could have been many that were successfully taken down. And if we go back to the drone bomber footage, it could be that some of these drones were the drones that eventually fly all the way over to Tatarstan to do their thing. But yeah, I'd say those Shahed drone facilities are surely their target number one, because Ukraine don't want to be sustaining 4 to 5, 350 to 500 Shahed type drones hitting them every night. They need to absolutely hammer those manufacturing facilities. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. We're going to start with Yanis Kluger talking about new data on Russian recruitment. Based on federal spending on sign-on bonuses, Russia recruited 89,601 men from January to March 2025. This represents a 22% increase over the same time period from last year. And I think that is significant because that's a lot of people, right? And Q4, wow. There was talk that recruitment spiked as people thought that Trump was going to bring the war to an end. And they thought if we could sign on, then we get the sign-on bonuses, get a bunch of money, and then they'll call peace, and we'd have made a load of money and not died on the front line. Problem is that that's kind of backfired because Trump clearly isn't going to make peace. Those 24 hours have been the longest 24 hours in history. And we're now, 4 months into his tenure, and we're no closer to peace. So I think they attracted a bunch of people who were hoping for peace and predicting peace. That hasn't happened. And now they've got them. So that recruitment was successful. I don't know how sustainable that's going to be. And Andrew Perpetua is indicating that actually they are struggling for troops. They are really thinly manned, the front lines, although that is definitely the case for the Ukrainians. In fact, I saw where was it? Was it Pokrovsk or was it further up north? I don't think it was Pokrovsk. Someone I was reading this morning said the ratio is 1 to 10. So the Russians have 10 times as many soldiers as the Ukrainians on that particular area of the front line. So the Ukrainians desperately trying to do their defense via drone, these drone line defensive corridors. But the Russians do have that advantage. Now, the question is that going to be going back down? to these low numbers that we saw quarter one, quarter two, quarter three last year. And then quarter four, that led to really high attrition rates of the Russians. But that could be because they're recruiting loads more, actually managing to successfully recruit way more people than they were previously. And if you look at the loss numbers, so if we go to Dell's stats, thanks Dell, he's an absolute legend, still doing his stats on a daily basis. These are available, linked in the description below. So please, check them out they are open source, check them out at your leisure. Here are the personnel stats, and you can see that they, if we look at December, so December, your quarter, oops, gee whiz. Let's try and get that back, shall we? So here we have a huge spike just above my flag to the left of my noggin. You've got a huge spike in losses that are now coming down. The purple line represents the trend line, and that is now on the decrease. But this could actually reflect recruitment figures, and that makes a lot of sense, right? You can only throw as many people into attacks as you are recruiting. Like if you've got no one left, then you're not going to send them into your attacks, which means since you are using this calculation as the Russians of however many people takes however many square kilometers, there is a direct correlation. There's a causality going on between recruitment and territorial gains and Russian losses. Okay, the more territory they gain, the more troops they lose. But that is contingent upon their recruitment. So it's recruitment first, then we can throw them into the front lines, then we can take territory. And so when you go back to, where am I? What am I talking about? When you go back to this graph, it looks somewhat similar to this graph, right? There is a recruitment to losses similarity. So, it's dropping down, but it's not as low as it was back here, but then they were recruiting far fewer people back there. Okay? Anyway, that's just my interpretation of that. So if you want the Ukrainians to succeed as much as possible, you need the Russians to struggle to recruit, as well as you needing to hit. And recruitment struggles might be themselves dependent on how well the Ukrainians do. So there's a kind of cycle there, because if you see the Russians are getting hammered consistently, then you're less likely to sign up for being hammered. But then it depends on the information, your access to accurate information. So the Russians don't know about this, then they happily recruit themselves into the armed forces for a nice hefty pay. And then the question is also how many of these are foreign foreign people and whatnot that they're able to get from distant nations. But there's your recruitment stats, and there's your personnel losses stats. Anyway, there you go. Moving on. Now, concrete hangars for aircraft that Russian soldiers are building at Saki airfield in Novofedorivka in Crimea. You are going to see a lot of this. I talked about how there's satellite imagery evidence of this happening in a whole host of Russian air bases. It's 2 years too late, or 2 years late. This should have been done years ago. In fact, people like Fighter Bomber, the aviation telegram source for the Russians, has been calling on this to be a thing for years now. Very, very clearly calling for this. And it seems that only since Operation Spiderweb and whatnot, that the Russians are like, oh yeah, we better protect our airplanes. So they're frantically, it seems, building these different defensive structures. Okay, what else do we have? Here we have the Foreign Minister for Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, urging immediate, powerful new sanctions against Russia following one of the most massive airstrikes of the war overnight. It's funny though. I don't have it here. I've got a tweet from a Ukrainian just saying, now that the US just are not, now they've left us to dry, thrown us under the bus. Let's just get on, like, feel a bit freer. I kind of know where we are now. Let's get on with it, type thing. Like, the US have completely just given up on Ukraine for all intents and purposes. Keep talking about how Trump 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 week, 2 week, 2 week. In fact, those 2 weeks are now up again, and he's not only is Elon Musk posting stuff connecting him to Jeffrey Epstein, now a distant memory because of the LA riots, a very convenient set of LA riots that have happened. I think you're going to see Trump concentrating on these other things, and I think Ukraine will be left to have weeds grow over it in terms of the kind of attention that the US is giving it. I don't know, maybe not. Quote, Russia hit a maternity hospital and residential buildings, killing and injuring civilians, said Sabihai. It rejects peace, so it must face the consequences. No more waiting. Really speaking to an audience of one there, but I don't think Trump is listening. No more waiting. They're waiting for the bill to go through Congress, but that's going to be watered down and changed really significantly. Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal's bill, or they just want the US to just do something, anything, help out in some way. But in the absence of that, then the Europeans need to step up. I was listening to Sir Bill Browder talk on Times Radio yesterday, where he was saying, or I listened to it this morning, where he was saying, that was my shower listening. That's how cool I am. Just all the time listening to information. But yeah, just listening to Bill Browder say that if you might see the $300 billion or billion euros of frozen Russian assets be released fully by the EU, by nations, when they get to this very stark dilemma of, like, either we give them loads of our tax money, our taxpayers' money, to, because we want them to succeed, but then we're underfunding our healthcare and education, and then our electorate gets really angry because we haven't fulfilled domestic political promises. So we either do that, and then we succeed in stopping Russia, or you release 300 billion euros of frozen Russian assets, but then suffer like legal issues and scaring the markets and whatnot. So at the moment, they're not doing the latter because they can just about help Ukraine enough within the means, and releasing money in the EU through preferential borrowing and whatnot. But it's but we need the US to step in and help, because they've got so much scope to help and so much equipment and the ability to hurt Russia with sanctions and secondary sanctions, etc., etc. Okay, but if that doesn't happen, Bill Browder was saying, you are going to see the 300 billion euros be like the get out of jail card for Europe. Because if the US isn't helping, then all of that equipment and expenditure has to come out of taxpayers, out of budgets. And the European nations don't have those budgets and don't want to steal, rob Peter to pay Paul. They don't want to steal from the healthcare budget to pay for aid to Ukraine. So that 300 billion euros may become more and more and more of a viable option, or necessary option, basically, what he was saying. It will be, mark my words, that will be how Europe gets out of a sticky wicket there in terms of funding. Now, here we have interesting, and this is quite a long thread of all of the examples this person can find of people on Twitter connecting the LA riots to Ukraine and Euromaidan. I was curious to see what the Russian trolls are doing with this Russian propaganda narrative. So I did a search for Los Angeles Maidan, and here they are. I have an interesting collection of them, some tweeting the same things as others, so let's begin. They are very busy, the Russian trolls online, trying to connect the protesters in LA with Ukraine's Euromaidan, and therefore, if you are Republican in the US and you're hating on the protesters and hating on Mexican flags waving, then you're going to be guilt by association. You're going to be hating on Ukraine aid, because those Euromaidan protesters are just the same as the LA rioter protesters, except they're not at all, and it's completely different context and blah blah blah. But that's what the Russians are doing. So just be wary about that. It is happening, and there's plenty of evidence of it happening, because look at all these tweets. Jack's House has compiled this list of them. You got Alexander Dugin, LA equals Maidan. There you go. You've got your ultra-nationalist, genocide advocating Russian philosopher, the ideology behind Vladimir Putin. LA equals Maidan, the same people behind the same goals. He's onto something, says this supposedly American source. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass used to sit on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, an NGO that supported the regime change operation in Ukraine in 2014 by sponsoring the Maidan Revolution. What games are they playing with President Trump? So on and so forth. You know, the LA riots are cut and paste of Kiev's Maidan. The same methods, same pictures. In Kiev, it was against Putin. In LA, it's against Trump. Globalists hate them both. Insurrection in LA, globalists strike back, just beginning. Yeah. Michael Caputo. This is a textbook color revolution. Georgia 2003, Ukraine 2004, Kyrgyzstan 2005, Myanmar 2007, Maidan 2014, Georgia 2019, Los Angeles 2025. After Andy Ngo, yeah, just talking about Antifa and LA. It's really, really typical. Euromaidan, Maidan connected to LA. Just be warned that that there is a concerted effort there to in the information spaces. And I just want to play you this. This is bloody Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, that's just gone on. I talked about this yesterday. Just went to this Zagreb Institute, a forum for the future or something, 2050, where you had all sorts of horrible people. Alex Jones and Jeffrey Sachs was there, and your man here. What else? I can't. There was one other chap. Anyway, you know, typically pro-Russian simps. Listen to this horrible statement from Errol Flynn.
Time in Russia.
Errol Musk. What decade am I in?
I'm completely amazed. I don't know why I haven't been here before. I think the image that people give to us in the West of Russia is completely wrong. Russia is wonderful. It's absolutely amazing. And it's quite clear to me that Moscow is the premier city, capital city in the world. Far greater than any other city, and I know them all. So I can only say I'm so glad to be here. And in fact, I'm overwhelmed. I can't believe it. It's just so wonderful.
I'll tell you what, should we put you in butcher and get you shot in the back of the head by a Russian? Should we do that and see if you think Russia's all wonderful? Should we put you in a children's cancer ward and have a cruise missile come down and blow it up? Should we put you there and just ask you if Russia's wonderful. Moscow's just the centre of the world. Wonderful place. Wonderful place. Just, it makes me insanely angry. But it's ignorance and it's susceptibility. I'm going to rant. Errol Flynn, bloody hell, Errol Musk. I will flick you into space and into the next universe. If I could. Because that, I think, is heinous. Sorry I'm not ending on a positive note. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.